I want to talk about anger because I think that anger is a feeling that most wellness conversations quietly avoid because it doesn't fit the narrative of healing and calm and becoming your best self. So nobody really wants to talk about it. They don't want to talk about, you know, maybe they'll talk about the explosive side, maybe they'll talk about the obvious kinds of anger, but they don't want to talk about the quiet kind of anger. So that's the anger that got buried so early and so thoroughly inside you that you might not even recognize it anymore as anger. You might know it as anxiety or exhaustion or maybe the feeling of being vaguely resentful, but you don't quite know why. I often see it in my students as this propensity to say, I'm fine, when they're clearly not fine. And I think that somewhere in childhood, most of us learned that anger wasn't safe. It's not safe to express it, it's not safe to feel it. And this might have been explicit. You might have been told, don't be angry, or you might have been punished when you showed it, or you might be shamed for raising your voice. Or you might have been told off, like I was from a young child, for stamping my foot. Or it could have been a little bit subtler. You might have seen what happened to people who showed anger in your house. You might have learned to read the room. And often we learn that keeping the peace requires us to keep ourselves quiet. So we convert the anger into something more acceptable. One of those things is anxiety, because worry is a lot more palatable than fury is. For a lot of the people I work with, they turned it into people pleasing because making everyone else comfortable meant that no one ever got close enough to trigger your anger in the first place or for you to trigger their anger. And there's also the people who display over responsibility because if you control everything, nothing can make you angry. And then, of course, there's depression. Sometimes it turns into depression because sometimes when anger has nowhere to go, it turns inward. I remember years ago reading a book called The Dance of Anger by a lady called Harriet Lerner. I think I read it in my 20s. It's a fascinating book. She spent decades mapping, this out. And she talks about how anger in people who have been socialized to suppress it doesn't disappear. It transforms. It goes underground. And underground, it's quietly shaping everything. I think about this in my own life. I wasn't someone who was allowed to be openly angry. Growing up, there wasn't any space for it because my adoptive mother was so angry herself. So I learned to manage everything carefully. I became the person who could read what was needed in any situation and hopefully try to respond it. Was very competent. And for years, I just thought that was who I was. But what I gradually understood, and it took time really sitting with it, is that underneath that competence, I had this very old anger that never had a space to land. I don't think it was rage or bitterness. I think it was just a legitimate human response to things that had happened that had never been allowed to exist. And when I finally let myself feel it, not perform it, not dump it on anyone, but just acknowledge that it was there and that it made complete sense that it was there, something changed. Not overnight, but something that had been held very tight for a long time started to release. Our uncomfortable feelings carry information. Anger specifically is usually information about a boundary that's been crossed, about something that mattered to you that hasn't been honored. It's about something that isn't right. And if you suppress that signal over and over, you don't just lose the anger, you actually lose the information. So you stop knowing what your boundaries are, you stop knowing what matters to you, you stop knowing what you actually think and feel because you've filtered it for so long. So our little experiment around this is not to go and express your anger at anyone. It's gentler than that. What I'd love for you to do is just sit quietly for a few minutes and ask yourself honestly, is there something I've been telling myself I'm fine about that I'm actually not fine about? So not a catastrophe, not something dramatic, just something that, if you're honest, has been quietly bothering you. Maybe something you've been managing or accommodating or smoothing over. So don't do anything with it, just allow yourself to name it. Maybe write it down if that helps. Acknowledging it. Yes, this bothers me, and that's okay. This is where the shift begins. Because you're allowed to not be fine. You're allowed to have feelings about the things that happen to you. That's not weakness, that's being human. So you've got to understand that the feelings that you were taught not to have, they didn't disappear. They've been waiting for you to come back to them. And it's really important that you do. I hope this has been helpful. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.